Hello. All right. Now it's time to work through the rest of chapter 3, and we will have covered our introduction to SQL. The next big part of the chapter are aggregate functions. And these are really handy for a whole bunch of sort of basic calculations that we want to make. One thing to note, though, is this is the limit. These are some basic calculations that are really common, and so that it covers that case. But in a lot of other cases, as we look at data science and other stuff, these are not the sole limit of what we're interested in when we look at data in a database. And so in a lot of other cases, we'll have to issue a query or a series of queries to pull data into a computer program and compute over that data what we want, programmatically, writing whatever code it is that we need. We can't do everything with these aggregate methods, but a huge amount of stuff can be done when we quickly want to try to figure stuff out. So what are these that we can compute? So these methods, so we can compute the average, the minimum, the maximum, the sum, and we can count a number of rows. Okay, and so the idea is we can apply these to the rows of a select. So you're going to have some select, and then you're going to put in one of these functions. So one of these guys is going to go into the function here. We're going to apply it to some column of our resulting relation. So from, we've got some relation, so it's got a bunch of columns. So one of those column names is here, where, again, you can have your predicate. So it's basically, grab a bunch of rows from this table, across all of those rows, apply this function. So it can take the average of something, find the minimum, maximum, sum them up, count how many rows we have here. Now, one of the things that you might want when it comes to counting the number of rows, and in fact, I will tell you, counting is almost absolutely the most common thing that you're wanting to do. So you're often going to find yourself doing select count star from blah, and you can tack on a where or whatever, but you're like, I want to know how many things there are. Okay, so yeah, so I want to know how many there are like this. How many things are greater than this? How many things are less than this? How many things are equal to this? Select count star. Like, you don't even have to name the column. Okay, so that's a handy shortcut. But sometimes you want to know how many unique things there are. So you can do select count, and of the resulting rows, you take this column and you slap a distinct before the column and from blah. And so you've got this column name here, but the distinct says, there could be duplicates in this. So what I want you to do is I want to take all of these things, remove the duplicates from them, now give me the count. So this way I can know how many unique things there are. And so there's all sorts of things that this could happen, with, I'm going to return, customer IDs, and there's all sorts of reasons I might have duplicates in my result set. So I want to count the distinct ones. How many unique customers that I have? So that's very handy. All right. Now, stepping up from there, a bit more tricky, but super cool, is group by. I don't know if you've ever seen this like in an application. A place where I often see it is like email applications. I think Microsoft Outlook has this sort of functionality where, so we've got all of these emails in your inbox, and there's different ways to view them. One of the things you can do is you can be sort of like, group it by a week. And so then you'll see, all the emails broken up into by week or group by sender. All right, so all suddenly I get a summary or chunks, which are, it's taken all my emails, it's found all the people who sent me email, and then there's units, which are, oh, these are the emails from this person. Then there's another unit from this person. It's like a display, but basically it says, oh, we're not group bys. Rather than apply this aggregate method across all the rows, what we're going to do is we're going to take the rows that you select. You're going to give me something, like a customer ID that you want me to group them by. Oh, okay, so now I'll break those rows into subparts by that thing that you gave me, and then I'll do the aggregate on each of the subparts. All right, so maybe we've got a database and it's got customer purchases, and we want to know what each customer's average purchase amount is, or the sum. We want to sum up, find out which customer has spent the most money, or our most valuable customers. So we could do this select, group it by the customer ID, take the sum of their purchases, and print out basically, oh, this customer ID, whatever, has bought a total of this amount of stuff. And we could see that. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's what group by lets us do. So let's take a look at this again. So again, this is group by allows us to divide our tuples into groups and then apply the aggregate function to each group. So as a tiny little example here, maybe I've got a relation, a table called scores. I got a column ID. I have a column score. And ID1 had a score of 80. ID1 also had a score of 90. And ID2 had a score of 2. I could go and, I could select ID, average score from scores. Now, what I want to do is I want to group by the ID so that I get the average for that ID. So I'm going to have a group by ID added on to the statement here. And so again, we're going to, let's skip ahead to here. So this is the table we're going to go from. We could have a where clause in here if we wanted. Okay, so we could pick which rows we wanted to operate on. Then so it's basically a select, and ignore the projection portion of it at the moment. So select, we're going to got our table. We can put a predicate in here. I chose not to have a predicate for this simple example. All right, so that gives us a resulting relation with that's the rows that are selected from that table. Then it basically says, now chop that up into a whole bunch of subrelations where you've grouped them by each sort of subrelation, subtable having the same ID. So basically, this was select from scores. That's selecting all the rows. Now group by ID. And so these guys turn into one group, and this turns into the other group. So now I've got, it's like a mini table there and a mini table there. Now for each one of those tables, take that table and send it into this fancy projection now. So, ID, you're like, wait a minute, I got lots of rows here. The trick is you can have other columns here if you put them in the group by, because this is all the same. All the rows will have the same ID, so I can print out that ID. I can project that column. This applied the aggregate over all the rows that were in this little subpart. All right, so Okay, so that gives me as an output, I'm going to get ID, I'm going to get average score, and the ID 1, average score is 85, ID 2, the average score is 70. All right, so that gives me my final little result set. A little table like that comes out. All right, that's the way it works. And then again, as you kind of in your mind, you're like, okay, which rows do I want? How do I want to group them into subparts? And then for each one of those subparts, I can get if anything that I've put in the group bys, because you can group by multiple columns. Okay, so that it'll be all the rows that have those columns that are identical, so they can group by that. And then you can apply average, max, min, count, whatever, all sorts of things. And you can do this, you can do all sorts of those aggregates. You can apply lots of aggregates to the subparts. It's really slick, I tell you. All right. There are some other things that we can do with our aggregate methods. You've got in section 3.7.3, you can read more about it, but the basic idea is you could have, blah, 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 where having, and then you can do an aggregate function. So you can have some aggregate function, and you're going to, so here, having, and then you're going to do, some sort of operator, blah, here. So these are things like equals, greater than, etc. This is, some value that you have in here. This is your column. All right. So you could have some statement, select blah, 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 from where, and then what you're going to do is you're going to check, this is going to be, average, count, whatever it is, and then some comparison. All right, so you can basically be applying this, and wow, I just blanked out. The only way that's going to work is if I have to come back to that one. Wow. I should find you an example. But this is the basic thing. The notion would be that this would be effectively doing a group by. All right, I'll have to check on that. My apologies. This is one of the things they say. Sometimes when you teach stuff, you realize whether you know it or not. And I just realized I'm missing something in my conceptual understanding of that. All right. Section 3.7.4 talks about nulls and Boolean values. It repeats this warning that nulls are ignored by aggregate methods, average and max and min and stuff, but not count. So the idea is count. We're always wanting to know how many rows there were. And null is something that we want to count. Oh, that's a row. Who cares if it had null or not? I want to count it. The problem is if you apply average across that same set of rows and they have nulls in them, those nulls are skipped over. They're not part of the calculation. And so you can be messed up with this. You can say, oh, I have this many people and their average wage is the following. But in fact, the count will not be the same amount as the people here if you've got nulls in it. So it's a big warning there. It tells you that there are some aggregate methods, some and every, that you can apply to Booleans. All right. I'm going to pause the video there, come back with understanding having in a moment.